A millionaire refused black twins at birth, denying they were his and paying to make sure they'd never be seen again. But 18 years later, he gets a shocking call that shakes everything he thought he buried. These aren't just any boys. They're back, and they know everything. Who raised them? How did they survive? And what exactly do they want now? What he hears next will force him to face the past he tried to erase, and a truth that could destroy him. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. The autumn wind rattled the crystal chandeliers in Richard Hale's study as he poured himself another glass of expensive bourbon. The ice clinked against the crystal, a sound that usually brought him comfort after long days of closing deals and building his empire. But tonight was different. Tonight, his hands trembled slightly as he lifted the glass to his lips. Across from him, Lila sat perched on the edge of a leather armchair, her work uniform still crisp despite the late hour. Her delicate fingers were intertwined in her lap, betraying her nervousness. The warm lamplight caught the slight sheen of perspiration on her forehead as she gathered her courage. "I'm pregnant, Richard," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "With twins." Richard's hand tightened around his glass. He kept his face carefully neutral, years of business negotiations serving him well in this moment. But inside, his mind raced with calculations and consequences. "Twins," he repeated, buying time to think. His empire, built carefully over 2 decades, flashed before his eyes. The upcoming merger with the Whitman family's real estate holdings would make him a billionaire. Caroline Whitman, his perfectly suitable fiancée, came with old money connections that would cement his place among New York's elite. Lila nodded, one hand unconsciously moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "I took 3 tests to be sure. I'm about 8 weeks along." Richard set his glass down with deliberate care and crossed the room to her chair. He placed his hands on her shoulders, feeling her slight frame trembling beneath his touch. "Don't worry," he said, his voice honey smooth. "I'll take care of you, of all of this." Lila looked up at him, hope brightening her eyes. "Really? I was so scared to tell you." "Of course," Richard assured her, even as his mind began formulating plans. "Everything will be fine." But as weeks passed, Richard's promises proved as empty as the spaces he left behind. Meetings that used to happen in his study became rushed conversations in hallways. Late-night drinks turned into quick nods as he passed her cleaning the living room. Each time Lila tried to discuss their future, Richard found another urgent call to take or appointment to keep. By her 8th month, Lila's pregnancy was impossible to hide. She'd been moved to the guest house, officially to rest, but really to keep her out of sight from the steady stream of wedding planners and Whitman family members who visited the main house. Her growing isolation was broken only by Margot's daily visits. Margot had worked for the Hales for 15 years, long enough to see through Richard's polished facade. She watched as Lila withdrew into herself, noticed how the young woman's usual bright smile dimmed with each of Richard's rebuffs. The older maid began bringing extra portions of food to the guest house, sitting with Lila during her breaks, offering what comfort she could through presents and small kindnesses. One evening, as Margot helped Lila fold baby clothes donated by her church, she caught the younger woman staring at a photo of Richard in the society pages, arm in arm with Caroline Whitman at a charity gala. "He's going to make things right," Lila whispered, more to herself than to Margot. "He promised." Margot's hand stilled on the tiny onesie she was folding. "Child," she said carefully, "some promises aren't worth the breath used to speak them." The night everything changed came with a storm that shook the windows of the guest house. Thunder crashed overhead as Lila's labor started 2 weeks early. Her first cries of pain were drowned out by the howling wind. Margot found her hours later during her evening check, crumpled on the bathroom floor in a pool of blood. "Hold on, child," she urged, already dialing 911 with shaking fingers. "Help is coming." Lila's breath came in short gasps. "The babies," she managed between contractions. "Please, save my babies." The ambulance's sirens wailed in the distance, but Margot knew with growing dread that they were too far away. She held Lila's hand as the young woman pushed, coaching her through the birth of first one tiny boy, then another. The baby's cries were strong, but Lila's grip on Margot's hand grew weaker with each passing moment. "Beautiful," Lila whispered, looking at her sons with dimming eyes. Tell them they were loved." Her last breath escaped softly, like a sigh. The paramedics burst in moments too late, their urgent movements and professional voices filling the small space. But Margot's attention was fixed on the doorway, where Richard Hale stood in his tailored suit, staring at the scene before him with cold calculation. He waited until the paramedics had pronounced Lila dead and stepped away to make their calls. Then he moved closer, looking down at the two squirming bundles in Margot's arms. His face showed no trace of grief or responsibility, only inconvenience. "They can't exist," he said flatly. "Make them disappear." Margot stared up at her employer of 15 years. This man she had served loyally through countless dinner parties and business meetings. She saw him clearly now, not as the charismatic success story he presented to the world, but as someone who could look at his own newborn sons and see only threats to his ambition. The babies squirmed in her arms, their tiny faces scrunched in distress, unaware that in their first moments of life, their father had already denied their right to exist. Thunder cracked overhead as Margot sat in her small quarters at the back of the Hale mansion. The room felt smaller than usual, the weight of the night's events pressing in on her like a physical force. A single lamp cast weak light across her worn furniture, creating long shadows that danced on the walls with each flash of lightning. In a wicker basket beside her bed, the newborn twins whimpered softly. Their tiny faces, still red and wrinkled from birth, bore no trace of the tragedy that had marked their entry into the world. Margot's weathered hands trembled as she adjusted the soft blankets around them. "Make them disappear." Richard's words echoed in her mind, cold and precise as the cut of his expensive suit. She'd served him faithfully for 15 years, managed his household with quiet efficiency, kept his secrets without question. But this was different. These were innocent lives, not inconvenient truths to be swept under imported rugs. Rain pelted against the windows, matching the turmoil in her heart. The right thing to do was clear, but the cost would be enormous. Everything she'd built over the years, her reputation, her savings, her security, would vanish the moment she defied Richard Hale. One of the babies stirred, his tiny fist escaping the blanket. Margot gently tucked it back in, remembering Lila's final words. Tell them they were loved. How could she honor that dying wish if she followed Richard's orders? Sleep evaded her through the long night. She sat in her old rocking chair watching over the twins, her mind working through possibilities and consequences. By the time dawn's gray light filtered through her curtains, she had made her decision. The knock on her door came precisely at 8 o'clock. Richard stood in the hallway, immaculate in a fresh suit despite the early hour. His face was a mask of professional detachment as he stepped into her room. "I trust you understand the delicacy of this situation," he said, placing a thick envelope on her small table. The paper made a heavy sound as it landed. "Inside, you'll find enough cash to ensure your discretion, along with the necessary documentation." Margot picked up the envelope with steady hands, though her heart pounded. Inside was a stack of $100 bills and a birth certificate. The document was official-looking, complete with proper seals and signatures. Under cause of death, it read simply, "Stillborn." "I've arranged for the proper authorities to handle all the paperwork," Richard continued, his voice as smooth as the marble floors he stood on. "Your only task is to ensure these complications are dealt with quietly." His eyes flickered to the wicker basket, then back to her face. "I don't need to remind you what happens if anyone discovers the truth. Your future employment prospects would be limited." The threat hung in the air between them. Margot nodded slowly, keeping her face carefully neutral. "I understand, sir." "Good." Richard straightened his already perfect tie. "I expect this to be resolved by tomorrow morning." He turned and left without another glance at his sons. Margot waited until his footsteps faded before moving into action. She'd packed a small bag during the night, just essentials, nothing that would be immediately missed. Into it went the few photographs she had of Lila, smiling and full of life, along with the cash Richard had provided. It wasn't stealing, she told herself. The money would go toward caring for his children, even if that wasn't his intention. Throughout the day, she went about her usual routine, giving no hint of her plans. She changed the twins, fed them formula she'd gotten from the hospital, and kept them quiet in her room. When evening came, she wrote a brief resignation letter. Due to an unexpected family emergency, I must tender my immediate resignation. I apologize for any inconvenience this may cause. Margot. She placed it on her made bed, alongside her house keys and security pass. The night shift guards were used to Margot's occasional evening trips to visit her sister. They barely glanced at her as she walked through the gate, carrying what appeared to be an ordinary overnight bag and a covered basket. "Just bringing my sister some of my famous cornbread," she said with a warm smile. It was the first lie she'd told in years, but it wouldn't be the last. The walk to the bus station was long, and her arms ached from carrying the precious basket carefully to avoid jostling its contents. The twins, mercifully, stayed quiet, soothed by the gentle motion and the soft humming Margot couldn't help but offer them. The station was nearly empty at that late hour. A few drowsy travelers dozed on plastic chairs under fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead. Margot purchased a one-way ticket to Detroit with cash, then settled into a corner to wait for the midnight bus. When it finally arrived, she boarded quickly, finding a seat near the back. As the bus pulled away from the station, she watched the bright lights of New York City begin to fade through the rain-streaked window. The twins slept peacefully in her arms, unaware of how their lives had changed in the past 24 hours. Margot looked down at their innocent faces, seeing traces of both Lila and Richard in their features. One day they would ask questions she wasn't sure how to answer. But for now, they needed only what she could give them: safety, care, and love. "I'll keep you safe," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rumble of the bus engine, "no matter what it costs me." The Detroit city bus wheezed to a stop in a neighborhood where most buildings wore decades of neglect like old scars. Dawn was just breaking, painting the gray streets in weak, golden light. Margot stepped down carefully, the wicker basket held close to her chest, her single bag hanging heavy on her shoulder. The address Leon had given her led to a two-story building with faded brick and a small garage workspace attached to the side. Metal security gates covered the windows, and the sound of distant traffic mixed with the occasional bark of neighborhood dogs. Margot hesitated at the front steps, realizing it had been nearly 5 years since she'd last seen her brother. The twins stirred in their basket, making soft cooing sounds that seemed too innocent for such a worn-down place. Before she could knock, the door opened. Leon filled the frame, his broad shoulders tensed as if ready for trouble. He looked older than his 35 years, his dark skin weathered, arms marked with old scars from his time overseas. His eyes widened at the sight of Margot, and then went wider still at the basket she carried. "Margot?" His voice was rough with surprise. "What's—" He trailed off as one of the babies let out a small cry. "I need help, Leon," Margot said simply. The words cost her pride, but pride wasn't something she could afford anymore. Leon's jaw tightened, but he stepped aside without hesitation. "Get in here before someone sees you." The apartment above the garage was small but clean, with mismatched furniture and walls lined with shelves of tools and electronics parts. Leon closed and locked the door behind them, then turned to face his sister. "Those better not be what I think they are," he said, crossing his arms. Margot set the basket down on his worn coffee table and pulled back the blanket. The twins blinked up at the new surroundings, their tiny faces a perfect blend of their parents' features. Leon let out a long breath. "Jesus, Margot. What kind of trouble are you in?" She told him everything. About Lila, about Richard's orders, about her escape. Leon listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. When she finished, he walked to a cabinet and pulled out an old bottle of whiskey. "You need papers," he said finally, pouring himself a shot. "New identity. I know someone from my army days who can help. Does good work, keeps quiet." He downed the whiskey. "But it won't be cheap." "I have money," Margot said, patting her bag. "Enough to start over." Leon nodded slowly. "Give me 2 days. You can stay here until it's done." True to his word, Leon's contact delivered a complete set of documents within 48 hours. Margot became Marcia Daniels, a widow from Cincinnati. The twins were registered as Zion and Zeke, her grandsons who'd lost their parents in a tragic car accident. She found work as a janitor at a nearby elementary school, where the principal took pity on her story and didn't look too closely at her references. The job wasn't glamorous, but it came with steady pay and health insurance for the boys. Their tiny apartment above Leon's garage became home. During the day, while Margot worked, Leon would keep an eye on the twins between repair jobs. His garage slowly became their classroom. "See this wire?" he'd say, holding up a circuit board while 3-year-old Zeke watched with fascination. "Red goes to red, black goes to black. Simple as that." Zion preferred the old computer Leon kept in the corner, his small fingers already learning their way around the keyboard. Both boys soaked up knowledge like sponges, and Margot made sure to nurture their curiosity. Every evening she'd sit with them on the threadbare couch, reading from secondhand books she'd bought with her spare dollars. "Sound it out," she'd encourage as tiny fingers traced letters on the page. "Take your time." The boys grew quickly, their personalities emerging like flowers pushing through concrete. Zeke was all motion and energy, always ready to help Uncle Leon with his tools. Zion was quieter, more thoughtful, watching everything with careful eyes that reminded Margot so much of Lila, it sometimes hurt to look at him. 3 years passed this way, marked by small victories and quiet moments. First words became full sentences. Wobbly steps turned into running feet. The sound of children's laughter filled spaces that had once held only silence. One autumn morning, Margot stood at their small kitchen window, watching the twins chase each other around the apartment. Zeke had somehow gotten hold of one of Leon's screwdrivers, again, and Zion was trying to convince him to give it back. "Uncle Leon said we can't play with tools," Zion protested, his serious little face scrunched in concentration. "I'm not playing," Zeke insisted, holding the screwdriver high. "I'm practicing." A smile touched Margot's lips as she watched them, but it faded as her eyes drifted to the view outside. Across the street, a new billboard had been erected overnight. Its glossy surface showed an artist's rendering of gleaming high-rise apartments, a luxury development project that would probably push out more local families. But it was the name at the bottom that made her blood run cold. Hale Enterprises, building tomorrow's Detroit. Richard's empire was expanding, reaching its fingers even here. Margot's hands gripped the windowsill, her knuckles turning white. Behind her, the twins continued their game, unaware of the shadow their father cast over their future. Her expression hardened as she stared at the billboard. "One day," she whispered, watching the boys in the window's reflection, "they'll know." The October morning crept through threadbare curtains as Margot moved silently through the small apartment. Her worn slippers made no sound on the creaky floorboards, a skill learned from years of early morning routines. She paused at the boys' bedroom door, taking in the familiar sight. 2 twin beds, 2 very different personalities on display. Zion's side was neat, organized with books stacked by size and a Rubik's Cube perfectly centered on his nightstand. 3 more puzzle cubes sat beside it, each more complex than the last. Zeke's side looked like a small electronics store had exploded. Screwdrivers, wire strippers, and bits of old gadgets scattered across his desk. "Time to wake up, boys," Margot called softly, flicking on the light. Zion's eyes opened immediately, alert and focused as always. He sat up, dark curls tousled, but expression already serious. Across the room, Zeke groaned and pulled his blanket over his head. 5 more minutes, came his muffled plea. "Not today," Margot said, pulling the blanket back. "Come on now. Breakfast is waiting." In the kitchen, the boys sat at their small table while Margot poured cereal. The morning light caught the gray starting to streak her temples, but her movements were still quick and precise as she pulled out their practice flashcards. 8 times 7, she said, holding up a card while Zion spooned cereal into his mouth. 56, he answered without hesitation, already reaching for the logic puzzle book hidden under his napkin. Zeke? Margot turned to the other twin who was using his spoon to separate his cereal by color. He squinted, fingers twitching as if counting invisible numbers. 50. 6? You can do better than copying your brother, Margot said firmly. Work it out yourself. Zeke sighed, putting down his spoon. His hands moved as he thought, like he was building something in the air. 8 groups of 7. That's like 4 groups of 14, which is 56. Good. Margot nodded, satisfied he'd found his own way there. Different paths, same answer. The morning continued smoothly until they reached Jefferson Middle School. Margot watched from her car as the boys walked toward the entrance. Even from behind, their differences were clear. Zion's straight-backed walk, clutching his books close. Zeke's loose swagger, backpack hanging off one shoulder. She didn't see the group of older boys waiting around the corner. "Hey, freaks," one called out. "Which one's the robot and which one's the retard?" Zeke's hands balled into fists, but Zion grabbed his arm. "Not worth it," he muttered. "Remember what Margot says." They hurried inside, separating for their classes. In computer lab, Zion finished his assigned work in minutes. While the teacher helped other students, he opened a browser tab and found his latest challenge, a university-level cryptography puzzle he'd been working on. His fingers flew across the keyboard, mind lost in the elegant dance of numbers and patterns. He didn't notice Ms. Peterson standing behind him until she gasped. "What is this?" she demanded, staring at the complex equations on his screen. Across the building in shop class, Zeke had discovered a broken printer in the supply closet. While other students worked on their assigned projects, he quietly took it apart, laying out each piece with careful precision. "Mr. Williams," the shop teacher's voice boomed. "What are you doing with that equipment?" Before Zeke could explain, the office intercom crackled. Would Ms. Daniels please come to the principal's office? Margot's heart raced as she hurried from her cleaning cart to the office. Had someone discovered their secret? Had the boys gotten into trouble? She found both twins sitting outside Principal Chen's office, Zion staring at his shoes while Zeke fiddled with something in his pocket. "Ms. Daniels," Principal Chen greeted her, gesturing to her office. "Please, come in. Boys, you too." Inside, Ms. Peterson and Mr. Rodriguez, the shop teacher, were waiting. Margot's throat tightened. "Ms. Daniels," Principal Chen began, "are you aware your sons are gifted?" The question caught her off guard. They're good students." "Good?" Ms. Peterson interrupted. Zion was solving a graduate-level cryptography puzzle today, for fun. She turned her laptop around, showing the complex problem he'd been working on. "And Zeke," Mr. Rodriguez added, "completely rebuilt our broken printer with parts from old machines in the basement. It works better than when it was new." Principal Chen leaned forward. "We'd like to enroll Zion in an advanced online learning program, and we think Zeke would benefit from specialized engineering workshops after school." Margot felt tears threatening but held them back. "The cost? There are scholarships," Principal Chen assured her. "These boys have extraordinary potential. It would be a shame not to nurture it." That night, after signing forms and making arrangements, Margot tucked the boys into bed. She watched as Zion immediately reached for his puzzle cube, while Zeke pulled out a small circuit board he'd been tinkering with. "Mind and hands," she whispered to herself. "Just like your mother." After they fell asleep, Margot pulled out a locked metal file cabinet from her closet. Inside, she carefully documented the day's events, adding to thick folders already full of report cards, test scores, and detailed notes about their progress. A rumbling engine drew her to the window. A white construction van with the Hale Industries logo crawled past their building, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Margot stood perfectly still until it disappeared around the corner, her face reflected in the glass, unreadable and stern. The autumn afternoon cast long shadows through the apartment windows as Zion and Zeke climbed the creaky stairs to their third-floor home. Zion adjusted his backpack, heavy with programming textbooks, while Zeke juggled his latest electronic project, a partially dismantled laptop he'd rescued from the school's recycling bin. "I'm telling you," Zeke said, excitement clear in his voice. "Once I replace the motherboard and upgrade the RAM, this thing will run better than new." Zion smiled at his brother's enthusiasm but stopped short when they reached their door. Through the gap beneath it, he could see unusual movement, shadows shifting rapidly, the sound of papers rustling. When they entered, they found Margot at the kitchen table, surrounded by what looked like organized chaos. Papers were spread across the surface, some marked with red circles and arrows. A detailed map lay partially visible under her elbow, and several flash drives were scattered among the documents. The moment she heard them, Margot's hands moved with surprising speed. Papers disappeared into folders, the map was quickly folded, and flash drives vanished into her pockets. By the time the boys fully entered the kitchen, she sat with only a stack of bills and her old calculator in front of her. "How was school?" she asked, her voice casual but slightly higher than usual. Zeke dropped his backpack and electronic parts on the counter. "Got an A on my engineering project. Mr. Rodriguez said my solar-powered phone charger was innovative." "That's wonderful," Margot smiled, but Zion noticed her eyes darting to the drawer where she'd hastily stuffed the papers. "And you, Zion?" "Fine," he answered, studying her face. "We learned about encryption methods in computer class today." Something flickered in Margot's expression. Concern? Fear? But it disappeared so quickly, Zion wasn't sure he'd seen it at all. "Just trying to make sense of these bills," she said, tapping her calculator. "You know how it is. Numbers never seem to add up quite right." But Zion had seen her handle their household finances before. She never needed to spread papers across the entire table for that, and she certainly never needed flash drives to pay bills. Over the next few weeks, Zion noticed more unusual behavior. Margot took more phone calls in private, speaking in hushed tones. She spent late nights at her computer, quickly minimizing windows whenever anyone walked past. The locked drawer in her room seemed to get more use than usual. One night, when Margot was working late at her second job cleaning offices, Zion made his decision. He'd been practicing lockpicking, a skill he'd learned from online tutorials, though he'd never told Margot. With Zeke keeping watch, he carefully worked on the drawer's lock. "This feels wrong," Zeke whispered, but his eyes betrayed his curiosity. The lock clicked open. Inside, they found several folders, each meticulously organized. One caught Zion's eye immediately, labeled simply RH. Next to it was another marked murder evidence. "What the hell?" Zeke breathed, looking over his shoulder. Zion pulled out a flash drive, but when he tried to access it on his laptop, he found the contents heavily encrypted. Multiple layers of protection blocked their access, the kind of security he'd only read about in advanced programming books. "I need to copy these," Zion said, pulling out his own drive. "We can work on breaking the encryption later." While he copied the files, Zeke paced nervously. Why would Margot have murder evidence? And who's RH? "I don't know," Zion replied, carefully returning everything exactly as they'd found it. "But she's been preparing us for something. Haven't you noticed?" It was true. Their education had always been unusual. Beyond regular schoolwork, Margot taught them about systems, about power structures, about people who wear masks of kindness while hiding daggers. During dinner the next night, Margot quizzed them as usual. "What's the first rule of analyzing a situation?" she asked, passing the potatoes. "Look for what people are trying to hide," Zion answered, thinking of the locked drawer. "And the second rule?" She turned to Zeke. "Everyone has a reason," he replied, "even if they pretend they don't." Margot nodded approvingly. "And the most important rule?" "Just because someone pretends to care," they recited together, "doesn't mean they do." These lessons had always seemed strange but important to Margot. Now, with the mysterious files hidden in their room, they felt like pieces of a larger puzzle. What the boys didn't know was that Margot was fighting her own battle. The persistent cough she'd developed over the summer hadn't gone away. The fatigue she blamed on extra work hours grew worse. When she finally visited a free clinic, the doctor's words hit her like physical blows. "Stage 3 lung cancer," he said gently, showing her the x-rays. "We need to discuss treatment options immediately." That night, after the boys were asleep, Margot sat at her small desk with 2 envelopes and her favorite pen. Her hand trembled slightly as she began to write. "My dearest Zion," the first letter began. "By the time you read this, you'll be 18, and I pray I've prepared you well enough for what's to come." The second letter started similarly. "Zeke, my fierce protector, my hands-on genius." Hours passed as she poured everything into those pages. The truth about their parents, about Richard Hale, about why she'd spent years gathering evidence and preparing them. When she finished, her cheeks were wet with tears, but her resolve was firm. She sealed each envelope carefully, then pulled up the loose floorboard beneath her bed, where she'd created a hidden compartment years ago. On each envelope, she wrote clearly, "Open on your 18th birthday." As she replaced the floorboard, her cough returned. She muffled it with her sleeve, not wanting to wake the boys. In the darkness of her room, she touched her chest, where the pain had been growing worse. "Just give me enough time," she whispered to whatever power might be listening. "They need to be ready." Snow fell softly outside the apartment window as Zion watched another family load their belongings into a beaten-up moving truck. It was the 3rd eviction this week. Across the street, bright orange construction barriers lined the sidewalk, and a glossy sign proclaimed, "Urban Renewal Project, Building a Better Tomorrow." Zion pulled his worn laptop closer, fingers flying across the keyboard as he dug through property records. The more he searched, the clearer the pattern became. Shell companies, hidden ownership transfers, all leading back to one name, Hale Industries. "You need to stop this." Margot's voice came from behind him, making him jump. She stood in the doorway, looking tired, a hand pressed against her chest. "Why?" Zion turned to face her. "These are our neighbors. Ms. Rodriguez from downstairs. She's lived here for 30 years. Now she has nowhere to go." Margot's eyes hardened. "This isn't your fight." "Then whose is it?" Zion challenged, gesturing to the window. "Everyone's too scared to speak up. Someone has to do something." "Leave it alone." Margot's voice carried a warning edge he'd never heard before. She started coughing, turning away quickly. But Zion couldn't leave it alone. The next day at school, he slipped into the library during lunch. The ancient computer terminals weren't much, but they were clean. No IP address could be traced back to their apartment. "You sure about this?" Zeke asked, keeping watch by the door while Zion worked. "Look at these numbers," Zion pointed to his screen. "They're moving money through fake accounts, inflating property values to force people out. It's all here." His fingers moved quickly, planting small changes in transaction dates, rerouting paperwork through different departments. Nothing illegal, just enough digital sand in the gears to slow things down. "Done," he said, finally logging out. "That should buy people some time." They thought that would be the end of it. They were wrong. 3 days later, a black SUV pulled up outside their building. A man in an expensive suit stepped out, followed by 2 others who looked more like boxers than businessmen. They started going door to door, their voices carrying through thin walls. "Think about your family," they told residents. "Accidents happen. Better to take the buyout now." Zeke was ready. He'd modified an old phone camera with a better lens and stronger microphone. Hidden behind a curtain, he recorded everything: the threats, the shoves, an elderly man being pushed against a wall. "We need to do something with this," Zeke said that evening, reviewing the footage. "But if we post it ourselves?" "Then we use a proxy," Zion finished, already setting up anonymous accounts. Multiple jumps, untraceable. The video went up at midnight. By morning, it had spread across local news sites and social media. Hale corporate thugs started trending. People began sharing their own stories of intimidation and forced evictions. From their rooftop perch, Zion and Zeke watched as crowds gathered in the street below. Signs waved in the cold air. "Stop the evictions. Homes not profit. Hale Industries. Reach corporate greed." "Look at that," Zeke breathed, filming the growing protest on his phone. "We did this. This is just the beginning," Zion said quietly. "Once people know the truth about Hale." The rooftop door slammed open. Margot stood there, her face a mix of fury and terror. "Inside now." Her voice shook. "But," Zeke started. "Now." They followed her down to their apartment. As soon as the door closed, she rounded on them. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" She pulled up the viral video on her phone. "This was you, wasn't it?" Neither boy answered, but their silence was confirmation enough. "We couldn't just do nothing," Zion finally said. "These people deserve justice. He needs to pay for—" The slap caught him completely off guard. Margot had never hit either of them before. When he looked at her face, he saw not anger, but pure fear. "Not yet," Zion said firmly, his cheek stinging. "Not until he pays." Margot's hand trembled as she lowered it, tears welling in her eyes. Below, the crowd's chants grew louder, echoing through the winter air. The late February wind rattled the apartment windows as Zion hunched over his laptop, surrounded by empty energy drink cans. For 2 months, he'd been working on new decryption algorithms, testing them against the encrypted files from Margot's drawer. Each failure only made him more determined. In the kitchen, Margot's coughing echoed through the thin walls. It had gotten worse lately, deeper, more frequent. She'd wave off their concerns with a tired smile, claiming it was just winter allergies or the dust from construction sites. But Zeke had noticed how she held her side when she thought they weren't looking, how she needed to rest after climbing the stairs. "You should see a doctor," Zeke told her one morning, watching her struggle to catch her breath after a coughing fit. "Don't fuss," Margot said, straightening her uniform for work. "I'm fine. Just getting old, that's all." But she wasn't fine. They could see it in the way her clothes hung looser, how she'd fall asleep in her chair while reviewing their homework, the growing collection of pill bottles she tried to hide in her bedroom. Zion channeled his worry into work, spending every free moment on the encrypted files. He'd taught himself advanced cryptography, studying patterns and building better tools. Tonight felt different. Something in the code was finally shifting. "I think I've got it," he called to Zeke, who was tinkering with surveillance equipment across the room. "This new algorithm, it's recognizing the structure." Zeke rolled his chair over, watching numbers scroll across the screen. "What's in there?" "Let's find out." Files began unlocking one by one. Financial records, property deeds, and then video files. "Look at this," Zion clicked on one dated 18 years ago. The footage was grainy, security camera quality, showing a lavish office. 2 figures came into view. Zeke leaned closer. "Is that—" A younger Margot stood rigid before a massive desk. Behind it sat a man they'd only seen in news photos and company logos, Richard Hale. Even through the poor quality, his cold authority was clear. "I don't care how you do it," Hale's voice crackled through the speakers. "Dispose of the problem. Make it look natural. You know what's at stake." Margot's voice was barely audible. "They're just babies." "They're a liability." Hale's fist hit the desk. "Do you want to lose everything? Your job? Your references? Who do you think will hire you after I'm done? Handle it, or I'll find someone who will." The video ended. Zion and Zeke sat in stunned silence, the implications sinking in. "He wanted us dead," Zeke whispered, "and Margot." The apartment door opened. They turned to see Margot in the doorway, still in her work uniform, looking more exhausted than ever. Her eyes fixed on the laptop screen, recognition dawning. "No," she breathed. "No, no, no." She stumbled forward, reaching for the laptop, but her legs gave out. Zeke caught her before she hit the floor, helping her to the couch. "Why didn't you tell us?" Zion asked quietly. Margot's composure cracked. Tears rolled down her cheeks as 18 years of buried truth spilled out. "Your mother, Lila. She was so bright, so full of dreams." Margot's voice shook. "She trusted him. We all did. When she told him she was pregnant, I thought he'd do right by her." She described that stormy night finding Lila collapsed in the guest house, the twins arriving too late for the ambulance to save their mother. He just stood there staring at you both like you were things to be disposed of. Margot's hands trembled. I'd served that family for 20 years, never questioned an order. But this… So you ran, Zeke said softly. Margot nodded. I took his money, enough to start over, used contacts to create new identities. The birth certificate he gave me said stillborn. As far as the world knew, you never existed. What about our mother? Zion asked. What happened to her body? Buried in a pauper's grave under a false name. I have the location. I visit every year on your birthday. More coughing racked her body. When she caught her breath, she looked at them with desperate intensity. Everything I did, the secrecy, the moving, the lies, it was to protect you. He would have killed you both without hesitation. You were a threat to his perfect life, his reputation, his billions. And now, Zeke's voice was hard. What are we now? Now you're strong, smart, but he's still dangerous. If he knew you were alive… He erased us, Zion said, his quiet tone masking the anger beneath. Buried our mother like she was nothing, made us ghosts before we even lived. Margot reached for them, but exhaustion overtook her. I'm so sorry. I should have told you sooner. I couldn't. You need to rest, Zeke helped her up. We'll talk more tomorrow. They got her to bed, made sure she took her medicine, and closed her door softly. For hours, they sat in the dark living room, processing everything they'd learned. The truth of their existence, the price of their survival, the weight of secrets finally revealed. Near midnight, Zeke broke the silence. We're ghosts, he whispered. He buried us before we lived. Zion looked at his brother, seeing his own pain and purpose reflected back. Then let's haunt him. Morning light crept through the kitchen windows, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Neither Zion nor Zeke had slept much. They sat at the table, untouched bowls of cereal growing soggy before them. The clock showed 8:15 a.m. They should have been at school, but some truths were more important than algebra. Margot emerged from her room looking smaller somehow, wrapped in her old fleece robe. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying and lack of sleep. She shuffled to the coffee maker, her movements slow and deliberate. You should be in school, she said, but there was no force behind it. We need to know everything, Zion said quietly. All of it. Margot's shoulders sagged as she poured her coffee with trembling hands. She settled into her usual chair, wrapping both hands around the steaming mug as if drawing strength from its warmth. Where do I start? She whispered. Our mother. Zeke leaned forward. Tell us about her. Really tell us. A ghost of a smile touched Margot's lips. Lila was remarkable, smart as a whip, with a mind for numbers that put the accountants to shame. She was working her way through night school, studying business administration. She didn't want to be a maid forever. Did she love him? Zion asked. Margot's expression hardened. She thought she did. Richard has a way of making people see what they want to see. He can turn on the charm like flipping a switch, all smiles and promises, but underneath… She took a shaky sip of coffee. The Hales aren't just rich. They're old money, with connections everywhere. Banks, politics, media. Richard's father built the company through real estate, but Richard, he wanted more. Always more. What about his family? Zeke pressed. His mother died when he was young. His father remarried into the Whitmore family, serious political players with some ugly history regarding race. When Richard took over the company, he expanded aggressively, bought up properties, forced out small businesses, whatever it took to grow the empire. And our mother got in the way, Zion said softly. Margot nodded. He was engaged to Caroline Whitmore, old money, perfect pedigree. The merger would have been worth billions. A pregnant black maid? That would have destroyed everything he'd built. So he destroyed her instead. Zeke's voice was tight with anger. The night she died. Margot's eyes grew distant. I heard her screaming from the guest house. By the time I got there was so much blood. She held on just long enough to see you both. Her last words were your names. Silence filled the kitchen. Outside, a construction crane swung slowly against the gray sky. "We need to stop him," Zion said finally. He pulled out a notebook filled with diagrams and code. "I've been mapping Hale Industries' network structure. There are vulnerabilities. Ways in. If we can get inside the system, find proof of his corruption." "No." Margot's voice was sharp. "Absolutely not. He has to pay." Zeke stood up, his chair scraping back. "For what he did to our mother, to us." "Listen to me." Margot grabbed both their hands, her grip surprisingly strong. "I didn't save you just so you could throw your lives away on revenge. I didn't raise you to become like him. Cold, calculating, destroying lives for personal gain." "But justice," Zion started. "Justice?" Margot's laugh was bitter. "You think you can beat him at his own game? He has armies of lawyers, private security, friends in high places. One wrong move and he'll bury you for real this time." She started coughing, harsh and deep. Zeke got her water while Zion helped her sit back. "Promise me," she wheezed when she could speak again. "Promise me you won't go after him while I'm alive. I couldn't bear it if something happened to you. Promise me you'll live, really live, not waste your lives on hatred." The twins exchanged looks. Finally, they nodded. "We promise," Zion said quietly. "While you're alive, we won't move against him." Margot seemed to deflate with relief. "Thank you. Now please, go to school tomorrow. Be normal teenagers. That's all I want." Later that night, after making sure Margot was asleep, the twins sat cross-legged on their bedroom floor. Between them, a single candle flickered, casting dancing shadows on their matching faces. "She's getting worse," Zeke whispered. "The cough, the weight loss." "I know." Zion stared into the flame. "But we promised." "On our 18th birthday, then." Zeke held out his hand. "When we're legally adults. When she can't stop us anymore." Zion clasped his brother's hand. "We'll burn his world down." "Together," they whispered in unison. Outside their window, snow began to fall. Silent, steady, inevitable. Each flake a promise of what was to come. The morning sun filtered through dusty curtains as Zion helped Margot down the hallway to the bathroom. Her steps were slower now, each movement careful and measured. At 14, he was already taller than her, his shoulder the perfect height for her to lean on. "I can manage from here," she said with a weak smile, patting his arm. In the kitchen, Zeke was already making breakfast. Simple oatmeal with brown sugar, the way Margot liked it. The twins had developed an unspoken routine over the past few weeks. One would help Margot with morning tasks, while the other prepared meals or tidied up. "Did you take your medicine?" Zeke asked when Margot finally made it to the table. She nodded, though both boys noticed how she barely touched her food. The medicine made her nauseous, but they knew better than to push. Stubborn independence was as much a part of Margot as her graying hair or the reading glasses that now hung constantly around her neck. "I'll do the dishes," Zion offered, gathering the bowls. "You should rest before your doctor's appointment." "You boys," Margot shook her head fondly. "When did you get so grown?" After making sure Margot was settled in her favorite armchair with a book, the twins split up for their daily routines. To anyone watching, it looked innocent enough. Zeke heading to Leon's garage for mechanical training, Zion to the library for advanced computer studies. The reality was far more focused. At Leon's garage, surrounded by the comforting smell of motor oil and metal, Zeke sat cross-legged on a worn mat as Leon demonstrated how to disassemble a security camera. "See these wires?" Leon pointed with a tiny screwdriver. "Red is power, yellow is video feed. You want to bypass the internal sensor without triggering the tamper alert." Zeke's fingers moved with practiced precision, stripping wires and reconnecting circuits. Leon had started him on basic car maintenance years ago, but lately their lessons had shifted to more specialized equipment: surveillance gear, security systems, field communications. "Good," Leon grunted as Zeke successfully looped the camera feed. Now show me how you'd install a passive tap without leaving traces. Meanwhile, at the public library, Zion had claimed his usual spot in the back corner. To casual observers, he looked like any other teenager doing homework on a laptop. They couldn't see that he was actually running penetration tests on a closed network he'd built to mirror corporate security systems. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he worked through encryption protocols and firewall configurations. The open-source security platforms he'd found online had been invaluable, teaching him everything from basic SQL injection to advanced social engineering techniques. When they returned home that afternoon, they found something unusual on their shared desk, a worn manual with a faded Hale Industries logo, its pages dog-eared and annotated in Margot's neat handwriting. The title read, Security Protocols and Safe House Operations. The twins exchanged knowing looks. Margot was in her room resting, but they could picture her placing the manual there, her own silent way of acknowledging what they were doing, of helping without helping. She knows, Zeke whispered, carefully turning pages filled with detailed floor plans and security procedures. She's always known, Zion replied, scanning Margot's notes about guard rotations and camera blind spots. She's been preparing us all along. That evening, after dinner and making sure Margot had taken her evening medication, the twins retreated to their room. Zion pulled out his laptop while Zeke kept watch at the door. Ready to test the new software? Zion asked, opening several programs he'd spent months developing. The first was a sophisticated ID generator that could create convincing documentation by pulling from various public databases. Next came a voice cloning tool that could replicate speech patterns from just a few minutes of audio samples. But their most ambitious project was already operational, a shell company carefully inserted into Hale Industries' vast network of subsidiaries. It had taken months of careful coding and data manipulation, but as far as anyone could tell, Summit Digital Solutions was a legitimate technology consultant that had been working with Hale for years. How's the infiltration going? Zeke asked, watching his brother's fingers dance across the keyboard. Almost there, Zion murmured, his eyes reflecting lines of scrolling code. I found a zero-day exploit in one of their smaller acquisitions, Stellar Communications. It's a satellite company they bought last year. Zeke leaned closer, watching as his brother navigated through layers of security. Despite their different approaches, Zion's digital expertise and Zeke's hands-on skills, they understood each other's work intuitively. Their network security is outdated, Zion explained, typing rapidly. They never fully integrated it with Hale's main system after the acquisition. It's like a side door nobody bothered to lock properly. Lines of code filled the screen, followed by a progress bar. Both twins held their breath. Finally, a new window opened, showing internal directories and file systems. Zion's face broke into a rare smile as he turned to his brother. We just got inside the gates. In her room down the hall, Margot lay awake, listening to the muffled sounds of her boys working. She touched the sealed letters hidden beneath her mattress, the ones meant for their 18th birthday, and closed her eyes, hoping she'd made the right choice in helping them prepare for what was to come. The small kitchen smelled of vanilla and warm sugar, as Zeke carefully placed 65 tiny candles around the edges of a homemade chocolate cake. Zion watched from the doorway, arms crossed, counting silently to make sure his brother didn't miss any. You're going to set off the smoke alarm, Zion said, but there was affection in his voice. Worth it, Zeke replied, striking a match. She deserves every candle. They found Margot in her favorite armchair, wrapped in the patchwork quilt she'd had since Detroit. Her face was thinner now, but her eyes still held that fierce spark they'd always known. When the boys entered singing Happy Birthday, carrying the glowing cake between them, her smile lit up the room. Oh, you foolish boys, she said, shaking her head. All those candles. Make a wish, Margot, Zeke urged, setting the cake on the coffee table. She looked at them both for a long moment, her expression softening. I only want one thing, she said quietly. Promise me you'll wait until you're 18 before you do anything real. You'll be adults then. You'll have rights. Until then. She took a shaky breath. Let me carry this burden a little longer. The twins exchanged glances. Zion's face remained neutral, but Zeke's jaw tightened slightly. "We promise," Zion said finally, his voice steady. Zeke nodded in agreement, though his eyes betrayed his reluctance. Margot studied their faces. She knew them too well, knew the careful calculations behind Zion's calm exterior, the barely contained energy in Zeke's restless hands. They were already planning, despite their promise. She could see it in the late-night glow of computer screens, hear it in their whispered conversations when they thought she was sleeping. "Help me up," she said suddenly. "There's something I need to show you." They followed her to her bedroom, where she pulled out a heavy metal case from under her bed. It was sleek and modern, with a biometric scanner built into the lock. "When the time comes," she said, running her fingers over the smooth surface, "this will help you finish it, but not before then." She pressed her thumb to the scanner, which beeped and recorded her print. "Both of you, put your thumbs here." One by one, they added their prints to the security system. The case remained locked, but now they had access, when the time was right. "What's inside?" Zeke asked. Margot shook her head. "You'll know when you need to know. For now, it's just insurance." Later that week, in their shared bedroom, the twins worked late into the night. Zion had built a virtual environment that mimicked what they knew of Hale's secure servers, allowing them to test different infiltration methods without risking detection. "Look at this," Zion said suddenly, pointing to his screen. "These IP pings, they're not random. Someone's actively monitoring for potential leaks." Zeke leaned over his brother's shoulder, frowning at the pattern of numbers. "How long has this been happening?" "Based on the logs, at least 3 months. Richard knows something's coming. He's preparing." The revelation settled heavily between them. Their father, the man who'd ordered their death before they'd taken their first breath, was already on guard. "Good," Zeke said finally. "Let him worry. Let him look over his shoulder for the next 4 years." That night, Zeke couldn't sleep. The house felt too quiet, too still. He got up for a glass of water and noticed the balcony door slightly ajar. Through the glass, he could see Margot sitting in her chair, staring out at the city lights. He stepped out into the cool night air. "Margot, you okay?" She was breathing heavily, one hand pressed against her chest. When she looked up at him, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Your mother," she said softly, "was smarter than both of you combined." Zeke knelt beside her chair, concerned by the wheeze in her voice. "You're not avenging me," she continued. "You're finishing what she never got to start. Lila, she knew what Richard was. She kept records, gathered evidence. She was going to expose everything, but..." A violent cough interrupted her words. "Let's get you inside," Zeke said gently, helping her to her feet. She felt lighter than ever in his arms, like a bird with hollow bones. The next morning, for the first time since they could remember, Margot didn't get out of bed. Her breathing was shallow, and when Zion brought her morning tea, she could barely lift her head to drink it. The twins stood in the doorway of her room watching her sleep. The metal case under her bed seemed to pulse with unspoken secrets, waiting for the right moment to reveal its contents. But for now, all they could do was wait and watch and remember their promise. The autumn wind scattered leaves across the small cemetery, their rustle the only sound breaking the heavy silence. 5 people stood around a simple headstone that read, "Marcia Daniels, beloved guardian and protector." Zion and Zeke stood shoulder to shoulder, their black suits a stark contrast against the gray sky. Leon's weathered face showed deep lines of grief as he placed a single white rose on the fresh earth. Mrs. Johnson from apartment 4B dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, while Mr. Rodriguez from the corner store kept his head bowed, his shop closed for the first time in 15 years to be here. They were the only ones who had truly known Margot, or Marcia as they'd called her, during their years in the building. "She was the strongest person I ever knew," Leon said quietly, his voice rough, "and the most stubborn." A ghost of a smile crossed his face as he looked at the twins. "Wonder where you two got it from." Zeke's shoulders shook slightly, but no tears fell. Zion remained still, his face a careful mask of composure. They'd found her 2 days ago, peaceful in her bed, as if she'd simply decided it was time to rest. The cancer had taken her quickly in the end, just as she'd wanted. No hospitals, no machines, no fuss. After the others left, Leon drove them home in his old pickup truck. The apartment felt different now, emptier, though nothing had been moved. Everything was exactly as Margot had left it. Her coffee cup still in the sink, her crossword puzzle half finished on the kitchen table, her reading glasses folded neatly beside her bed. "I'll make some coffee," Leon said, heading to the kitchen. He knew the boys needed a moment alone. Zeke walked into Margot's room, running his hand along the familiar quilt on her bed. Zion followed, his eyes scanning every corner as if seeing it for the first time. Something caught his attention, a slight irregularity in the shadows under the bed frame. "Zeke," he called softly, dropping to his knees. There, taped to the underside of the bed, was a plain white envelope. With careful fingers, Zion peeled it free. Inside, they found a single key with a numbered tag and a handwritten note in Margot's precise handwriting. "The time for secrets is over. Everything you need is waiting. -M." Below the message were coordinates and a storage unit number. "Leon," Zeke called out, his voice tight with urgency. "We need a ride." The storage facility was downtown, a modern building with climate-controlled units. Their key opened Unit 2187, a medium-sized space filled with carefully organized boxes and filing cabinets. In the center stood a simple table with a laptop and an external hard drive. "She planned everything," Zion whispered, running his fingers over the dustless surface of the laptop. When they powered it on, a video file automatically began playing. Margot's face filled the screen, recorded sometime during her final months. She looked tired but determined. "My boys," she began, her voice strong despite her visible weakness. "If you're watching this, I'm gone, and it's time for you to know everything." For the next 20 minutes, they stood transfixed as Margot detailed the full extent of Richard Hale's crimes. She explained how Lila had been systematically gathering evidence of his corrupt dealings, environmental violations, and political bribes. The pregnancy hadn't been an accident. It had been leverage Lila planned to use to force Richard into exposing his own crimes. "Your mother was brilliant," Margot continued, her eyes bright with old anger. "She had everything documented, every meeting recorded. Richard found out too late to stop her completely, but early enough to—" She paused, composing herself. "To ensure she wouldn't live to testify?" Zion's hands clenched into fists as Margot explained how Richard had arranged for Lila to receive contaminated prenatal vitamins, slowly poisoning her throughout the pregnancy. The premature labor had been induced, not natural. "The original footage is in the red box," Margot said, pointing off-screen. "I saved it in multiple formats, digital, tape, even film. He can't erase all of them." Leon found the box while the twins continued watching. Inside were carefully preserved recordings showing Richard giving the order to dispose of the problem, both before Lila's death and after the twins' birth. "The blue folder contains everything about your mother," Margot continued. "Her real life, before Hale. She was a graduate student in environmental law. She had friends, family, dreams. She deserves to be remembered as more than just another of Richard's victims." Zeke opened the folder with trembling hands. Photos spilled out. Lila graduating college, Lila laughing with friends, Lila speaking at a climate change rally. Her eyes were bright and fierce in every image, full of the fire that would eventually lead her to challenge Richard Hale's empire. "The Black Ledger lists everyone involved," Margot's voice continued. "The doctor who supplied the tainted vitamins, the lawyers who buried the evidence, the board members who looked the other way. Every single person who helped Richard Hale murder your mother and try to murder you." Zion picked up the leather-bound book, its pages filled with names, dates, and detailed notes in Margot's precise handwriting. "And finally," Margot said, her image leaning closer to the camera, "in the sealed envelope marked, 'If all else fails,' you'll find a complete backup plan. Emergency contacts, safe houses, new identities, everything you might need if things go wrong. Use it only as a last resort. Your mother died trying to expose the truth. Don't let her death be for nothing." The video ended with Margot looking directly into the camera, her face softening with love. "I'm proud of you both. Be smart, be careful, be worthy of your mother's courage." Back in their apartment that night, Zion sat at his computer, fingers flying over the keyboard as he began building a secure distribution system for the evidence. Multiple servers, encrypted channels, deadman switches. Everything needed to ensure the truth couldn't be buried again. Across the room, Zeke methodically wrote names from the black ledger on their wall, each one a target, each one a conspirator in their mother's murder. The list grew longer and longer, spreading like a web of corruption around Richard Hale's name at the center. "We're not just taking Hale down," Zeke said, stepping back to survey the wall of names. "We're gutting the whole empire." The late February wind whistled through the gaps in their apartment windows. Zion sat at his desk, adjusting his tie in the webcam preview. 6 weeks until their birthday. 6 weeks until they could strike openly. But today they'd start laying the groundwork. "How do I look?" Zion asked, smoothing down his borrowed suit jacket. Leon had helped him find it at a thrift store. Zeke looked up from the electronics spread across his bed. Like every other tech nerd trying to look important, perfect. The interview request from Evocore Technologies sat open on Zion's second monitor. Their fabricated applicant, Marcus Chen, had an impressive but carefully crafted resume, just good enough to attract attention without raising flags. The deep fake photos they'd generated showed a pleasant, forgettable face that could belong to any young programmer. "Remember," Zeke said, "you're just another code monkey looking for remote work. Nothing special." Zion nodded, clicking Join Meeting. After a moment, a middle-aged woman with steel-rimmed glasses appeared on screen. "Marcus Chen, I'm Sarah Reeves, CTO of Evocore. Thank you for joining us today." "Thank you for considering my application," Zion replied, his voice steady despite his racing heart. They'd practiced this dozens of times. The technical questions came rapid fire. Zion answered each one with deliberate competence, showing skill without revealing his true expertise. When Sarah pulled up a code sample with intentional errors, he spotted them quickly but pretended to need a moment to think. "Very good," Sarah said, making notes. "Now, this position involves working with sensitive financial data. How would you ensure security while accessing our systems remotely?" Zion outlined a standard set of best practices, carefully avoiding mention of the more advanced techniques he actually used. "And of course," he added, "I'm happy to work within whatever security protocols Evocore has in place." Sarah's expression warmed slightly. "Excellent answer. Too many applicants try to tell us how to run our security." She shuffled some papers. "Well, Marcus, I'm impressed. We'd like to offer you a 3-month contract position starting next week. The paperwork will arrive by email today." "Thank you, Ms. Reeves. I'm looking forward to joining the team." After the call ended, Zeke grinned. "You're in." "Phase 1 complete," Zion agreed, loosening his tie. "Now comes the hard part." The next few days passed in a blur of careful coding. Zion built his backdoor program piece by piece, disguising it as routine system maintenance. He buried the code deep, spreading it across multiple seemingly unrelated files. To anyone checking, it would look like normal database optimization. Meanwhile, Zeke worked on his own preparation. Their apartment's spare room had become a makeshift workshop, filled with surveillance equipment salvaged from electronics recycling centers. He'd rebuilt and modified everything, creating tools that couldn't be traced to any manufacturer. "Check this out," Zeke called one evening, holding up what looked like a standard parabolic microphone. Modified the gain circuit and added a custom amplifier. Should be able to pick up conversations through double-pane windows at 200 yards. Zion glanced up from his screens. "Nice, how's the interference?" "Minimal, and I found the perfect spot to set up." Zeke spread out a map of downtown. "There's a vacant office in this building directly across from Hale's penthouse. The property management company's security is a joke." "Just be careful," Zion warned. "We can't risk getting caught now." That Friday, Zion's patience paid off. His system mapping had revealed a pattern. Every week, Richard Hale made a secured video call from his home office to an unlisted number. The calls were heavily encrypted, routed through multiple proxies. But Zion had prepared for this. His backdoor program had been quietly collecting encryption keys, building a database of internal certificates. When Hale's call connected that evening, Zion was ready. The video feed appeared on his screen. Richard Hale sat in his luxurious home office, silver hair perfectly styled despite the late hour. The other participant was Judge William Morrison, the same judge presiding over a controversial development case involving Hale Industries. "Bill," Hale said warmly, "I trust you received the package my assistant sent over?" The judge nodded. "Very generous, Richard. Very generous indeed. Consider it a token of appreciation for your careful consideration of our zoning petition." Hale's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I know you'll make the right decision for the community." Of course, the hearing is just a formality at this point." Morrison chuckled. "Though I must say, those environmental impact reports were quite creative." "We have excellent writers," Hale replied. "I'll have my people send over the exact language you should use in your ruling. Can't leave anything to chance." Zion's fingers flew across the keyboard, capturing every moment of the exchange. The video quality was perfect, faces clear, audio crisp. There would be no question about what was being discussed. When the call ended, Zion sat back in his chair, heart pounding. He'd just witnessed, and recorded, a federal judge accepting a bribe. This wasn't just evidence of corruption, it was a felony in progress. "Zeke," he called, "come see this." His brother appeared in the doorway, wiping grease from his hands. Zion played the recording. "Holy shit," Zeke whispered. "We actually got him, both of them." "Our first real piece of evidence," Zion agreed. He leaned back in his chair, allowing himself a small smile. "We just got our first bullet." "And there's plenty more where that came from," Zeke said, eyes fixed on the screen where their father's face had been moments before. "He won't even see us coming." The morning sun filtered through dusty blinds as Zion logged into his work terminal. His temporary desk was set up in their new base of operations, a musty room above Kelly's print shop, which had closed its doors 6 months ago. The space wasn't pretty, with water stains on the ceiling and creaky floorboards, but it served their needs perfectly. No neighbors, no cameras, and a clear view of 3 major Hale properties. "Got something?" Zion called out, scanning the new email in his work inbox. "They want me to help with the quarterly internal audit." Zeke looked up from where he was installing a signal booster near the window. "That's big. How deep does it go?" "All the way." Zion couldn't keep the excitement from his voice. "They're giving me access to the full financial network, every subsidiary, every account." "About time," Zeke said, tightening a final screw. 2 weeks of playing nice guy must have paid off. Zion cracked his knuckles and got to work. The audit team needed help tracking inconsistencies in their project funding reports. It was exactly the opening they'd been waiting for. As he dug through layers of financial data, patterns began emerging. Subtle at first, then glaringly obvious once you knew where to look. "Look at this," he muttered, pulling up multiple spreadsheets. "They're siphoning money from public housing projects through a chain of shell companies. The funds end up in private accounts controlled by the Hale family." The numbers were staggering. Millions meant for community development had been redirected into offshore accounts. Zion carefully documented everything, building an airtight trail of evidence. Then he began his counter-operation. Using secure drops and anonymous accounts, he started feeding select pieces of information to financial journalists known for investigating corporate corruption. Nothing too obvious, just enough breadcrumbs to get them asking questions. A tip about unusual payment patterns here. A leaked memo about suspicious contracts there. "How's the physical surveillance going?" Zion asked, scheduling another automated leak for the following week. Zeke grinned and pulled out his camera. "See for yourself." The photos were crystal clear. Marcus Wheeler, one of Hale's senior project managers, meeting with City Councilman David Torres in an empty parking garage. The exchange of a duffel bag was captured in perfect detail. "Wheeler's been making these drops twice a month," Zeke explained, spreading out more photos. "Always different locations, but same routine. The bag goes to Torres, and 3 days later, the council approves whatever permits Hale needs. Did you get inside the bag? Better. Zeke held up a small device. Modified thermal camera. The bags are always packed with stacks of cash, shows up clear as day through the fabric. Zion nodded approvingly. Good work. This matches perfectly with the money trail I found. Wheeler's division has been writing off millions in consulting fees to fake companies. As evening fell, they gathered around their planning table. Zion pulled up his latest network map on the secure laptop they'd built from scratch. Red lines connected dozens of offshore accounts, each carefully hidden behind layers of corporate facades. I've almost got the full picture, he said, highlighting several key nodes. Most of the dirty money ends up in these accounts in the Cayman Islands. But there's something bigger we haven't found yet. Some kind of master account that controls everything. Zeke unrolled a set of blueprints he'd obtained through their growing network of sources. While you're chasing the digital trail, I think I found our next target. He pointed to a secure storage facility owned by one of Hale's subsidiaries. They keep backup servers and hard copies there. If we can get the security footage from the loading dock, we might catch more of Wheeler's deliveries on tape. A break-in seems risky, Zion said, studying the layout. Not if we make it look like a regular burglary, Zeke explained. Hit a few other offices in the building, take some expensive equipment. The police will write it off as ordinary theft, but we'll get what we need. Zion considered the plan. Every system has a soft point, Zeke added. Ours is coming. The brothers worked late into the night, Zion's keyboard clicking steadily as he traced more financial connections, while Zeke fine-tuned his surveillance gear. The room above the old print shop had become their war room, walls covered with photos, documents, and maps all pointing toward their ultimate target, Richard Hale himself. A police siren wailed somewhere in the distance. Through the window, they could see the gleaming tower of Hale Industries headquarters rising above the city skyline. Each day brought them closer to their goal, each piece of evidence another step toward justice. Zion glanced at the calendar pinned above his desk. 4 weeks until their birthday. 4 weeks until they could unleash everything they'd gathered. For now, they would continue working silently, invisibly, ghosts in the machine gathering ammunition for the war to come. The city sparkled like freshly polished glass in the golden morning light as Zion methodically scrolled through his work emails, the gentle hum of his computer filling the quiet room. His heart skipped several beats when his eyes landed on a company-wide announcement, the words seeming to pulse on his screen. With trembling fingers, he quickly dialed Zeke's extension, drumming his fingers anxiously on his desk until his brother appeared. "Look at this," he said, pointing to the screen where the announcement blazed like a beacon of opportunity. Hale Industries is hosting their annual real estate gala in 3 weeks. They're announcing a major merger, the biggest deal of the year. All the heavy hitters in real estate development will be there. Zeke leaned in close, his breath fogging the screen slightly as he absorbed every detail. A meaningful look passed between them. Perfect timing, right around our birthday. Couldn't have planned it better ourselves. It gets better, Zion continued, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he pulled up additional information, each new detail making their opportunity more golden. It's being live-streamed to investors worldwide. Every major player in the industry will be watching, and Richard Hale himself will be giving the keynote speech. 45 minutes of undivided attention. Maximum exposure, Zeke said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face as he straightened up. When everyone who matters in the industry is watching, it's like he's setting himself up for us. They dedicated the entire morning to mapping out their plan, spreading digital blueprints across multiple screens while they traced possible entry points and escape routes. Zion's position at EvoCore wasn't just convenient, it was crucial, giving him unprecedented access to the presentation systems. He could prepare a devastating data dump of all their meticulously collected evidence, the carefully documented bribes, the intricate web of shell companies, the damning proof of stolen housing funds, and release it during the live stream when Richard would be most vulnerable. The hotel's using an automated system for everything, Zeke noted, his face bathed in blue light as he studied the venue's detailed blueprints. His finger traced along various access points. Climate control, security, presentation screens, it's all running through a central hub. I found a utility access point in the basement that connects directly to their network. No cameras, minimal foot traffic. Zion nodded thoughtfully, already running scenarios in his head. But we need to test our timing first. Make sure everything works perfectly. One wrong move, and we'll lose our only chance. There's a property auction next week, Zeke said, pulling up a calendar and pointing to the date. Same hotel, smaller crowd. Perfect practice run. We can test the system without drawing too much attention. They spent the next several days in intense preparation. Zion worked late into the night, creating an intricate and secure transmission pathway that would allow him to override the presentation system remotely without leaving traces. Meanwhile, Zeke memorized every security camera's blind spot, every patrol route around the hotel's utility entrance, timing each shift change down to the minute. The day of the auction arrived under clear skies. Zeke moved with confident purpose through the service entrance, wearing a maintenance uniform he'd carefully acquired from a local supplier. His tool belt held real tools alongside their custom equipment, the perfect cover. The utility room was exactly where the blueprints had indicated, tucked away in a quiet corner of the basement. Within minutes, his skilled hands had connected their custom hardware to the building's network, the small device blinking innocently among the other equipment. "I'm in position," he whispered into his encrypted phone, voice barely audible above the hum of machinery. "Network access confirmed. Everything looks clean." Across town, Zion sat tensely at his workstation, fingers hovering over his keyboard like a pianist about to perform. Starting the sequence in 3, 2, 1. Inside the elegant auction hall, wealthy buyers were engaged in heated bidding on foreclosed properties when the massive presentation screen flickered ominously. The auctioneer's voice faltered as internal memos suddenly appeared, damning documents showing how Hale Industries had systematically and deliberately forced families out of their homes to acquire the buildings at drastically reduced prices. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the well-dressed crowd. Phones emerged from pockets and purses, recording the evidence as it scrolled across the screen. Within hours, social media platforms exploded with outrage and accusations. Local news stations grabbed the story, running bold headlines about predatory real estate practices and corporate greed. "Did you see his face?" Zeke asked later that night, hunched over his laptop as he replayed the security footage he'd captured. Richard Hale stood at the polished podium, his practiced, confident smile cracking like thin ice as his carefully buried secrets appeared behind him. "He's angry," Zion observed quietly, studying their father's expression with clinical detachment. The subtle tightening around Richard's eyes, the almost imperceptible clench of his jaw, small tells that revealed the rage beneath his composed exterior. But he doesn't know where to look. He can't imagine his own sons could be behind this. The next morning, the fallout hit like a tsunami. Hale Industries' PR team scrambled into overdrive, working desperately to dismiss the leaked documents as elaborate fakes. But the damage was already spreading like wildfire. Protesters gathered outside their gleaming office buildings, their signs demanding accountability. Investigative journalists started digging deeper into their business practices, uncovering decades of questionable deals. Richard Hale's response was as swift as it was predictable. He hired CyberShield, an elite security firm notorious for tracking down corporate leaks with ruthless efficiency. Their analysts began combing through every network connection, every data transfer, leaving no digital stone unturned. Zion noticed the increased scanning activity immediately, his monitors lighting up with alerts. New security protocols appeared in the system like digital tripwires. His carefully constructed work alias, the identity he'd created to infiltrate EvoCore, started triggering alerts in the background. "They're getting close," he told Zeke, his eyes fixed on the screen as another security scan probed his digital footprint like searching fingers. "We've got 3 weeks until the gala. They'll find inconsistencies in my background if they dig deep enough. It's only a matter of time." "Then we stick to the plan," Zeke said firmly, his hand gripping his brother's shoulder. 3 weeks. One shot. Everything we've got. We've come too far to back down now. The brothers worked frantically, knowing their window was closing fast. Zion carefully moved their collected evidence through a complex maze of secure servers, preparing it for maximum impact upon release. Zeke refined his infiltration route, timing each step down to the second, leaving nothing to chance. The gala would be their moment of truth. Years of careful planning, months of gathering evidence, all building to one explosive night. They could feel time slipping away as CyberShield's analysts closed in, methodically eliminating false leads and zeroing in on the source of the leak with mechanical precision. But they weren't afraid. Fear had been burned out of them years ago, replaced by cold determination. They were their mother's sons, ghosts in the system, invisible but powerful. And in 3 weeks, they would show Richard Hale exactly what he had created when he tried to erase them from existence. "They'll find me soon," Zion said quietly, watching another security scan sweep through his work account like a digital bloodhound. "But they won't stop what's coming. We've made sure of that." Zeke nodded grimly, checking his equipment one last time with practiced hands. 3 weeks, then everyone sees who Richard Hale really is. No more masks, no more lies. The clock was ticking relentlessly forward, but for the twins, it wasn't counting down to danger. It was counting down to justice. The justice their mother never received, the truth that had been buried for so long. Soon, very soon, everything would change. The morning sun barely penetrated the thick clouds as Zion logged into his work terminal at EvoCore. His screen flickered, then displayed an urgent message: "Account access denied." His heart skipped a beat. He tried again, but the system rejected his credentials. His phone buzzed. It was an email from HR marked "Urgent, Immediate Termination." "We regret to inform you that your employment has been terminated effective immediately due to suspicious network activity." Zion's hands trembled as he read. CyberShield had traced his VPN address. They'd found patterns in his data access that didn't match his cover story. His carefully constructed alias was unraveling. He grabbed his emergency bag from under his desk and wiped his work computer's hard drive with a USB kill switch. As he headed for the exit, his phone buzzed again. This time it was Zeke. "They're on to us," Zeke said, his voice tight. "A PI just showed up at one of our dead drops. Started asking questions about recent activities." "How close are they?" "Too close. They're working backward through our trail. We need to disappear. Now." Zion took the stairs instead of the elevator, his mind racing. They had prepared for this possibility, but it was happening faster than expected. He ditched his work phone in a passing garbage truck and pulled out a burner phone from his bag. At their apartment, Zeke was already destroying evidence. Hard drives sizzled in acid, papers burned in the bathroom sink. Their wall of research had been stripped bare. "We've got maybe an hour before they connect the dots," Zeke said, stuffing equipment into bags. "The PI's good. He's asking about recent tenants, showing our surveillance photos." They worked quickly and methodically, following their emergency protocols. Zion transferred their critical files to an air-gapped server hidden in an old radio chassis. Zeke wiped their security cameras and replaced them with looped footage. Within 30 minutes, the apartment looked like any other empty rental. No traces, no trails, no evidence of their existence. They split up, taking different routes to their emergency meeting point. Zion took the bus south, then doubled back on foot. Zeke went through the storm drains, following a path they'd mapped months ago. 3 days passed in complete silence. No phones, no internet, no contact with the outside world. They moved between pre-arranged safe houses, never staying more than 8 hours in one place. Finally, they regrouped at Leon's garage. The familiar smell of motor oil and metal provided little comfort as they assessed their situation. "You got sloppy," Zeke said, pacing between old car parts. "Left too many patterns in the system. Amateur mistakes." Zion's jaw tightened. "I got what we needed. All the evidence is safe on our offline server. The risk was worth it." "Worth it?" Zeke's voice rose. "They almost caught us. 2 weeks before the gala, and you nearly blow our whole operation because you couldn't wait to dig deeper?" "Those files prove everything. Zion stood up, matching his brother's anger. The bribes, the murders, the whole corrupt network. Without them, we've got nothing. We've got nothing if we're dead. Zeke slammed his hand on a workbench, sending tools clattering to the floor. Both of you shut up. Leon's voice cut through their argument. He emerged from under a car, wiping grease from his hands. You're acting like kids throwing rocks at a tank. The twins fell silent, their anger deflating under their uncle's steady gaze. This isn't about hacking some files or leaking documents, Leon continued, his voice low and serious. You're trying to take down a machine, a system that's been running for decades. It's got backup plans for its backup plans. He picked up a wrench, turning it in his calloused hands. Your mother knew that. Margot knew that. That's why they lost. They tried to fight it alone. The twins exchanged glances, their earlier fury fading into something more focused. So what do we do? Zion asked. You do what you planned, Leon said. But you do it smart. You do it together. No more solo plays, no more risks without backup. They spent the next few hours reorganizing, rebuilding their security protocols. Zion mapped out new routing systems for their data. Zeke revised their physical security measures. As night fell, they were reviewing contingency plans when Zeke's burner phone rang. They froze. No one had this number. Zeke put it on speaker. A digitally altered voice crackled through the static. Stop digging or your next funeral will be yours. The line went dead. Silence filled the garage. Zeke's face broke into a grim smile. Now we know he's scared. The smile wasn't happy. It was the kind of smile that came from confirmation. Their father, the great Richard Hale, was worried enough to threaten them directly. They were getting close. Leon watched them from his workbench, seeing the determination harden in their eyes. The threat hadn't scared them. It had only made them more certain. They were their mother's sons, after all. The twins went back to work, their movements more precise, their focus sharper. The gala was 2 weeks away. Richard Hale had just shown his hand. Now it was their turn to play theirs. The grainy video played on their laptop screen, casting a soft glow across the twins' faces. In it, a young woman in a simple blue dress stood at a microphone, her voice clear and strong as she sang Amazing Grace at a local church fundraiser. Her eyes sparkled with life and her smile radiated warmth that seemed to reach through time. This was Lila, their mother, just 3 months before she died. Zion and Zeke sat cross-legged on the floor of their childhood bedroom, surrounded by tomorrow's battle gear, laptops, cables, encrypted drives, and surveillance equipment. But for now, they couldn't take their eyes off the screen. She was beautiful, Zeke whispered, his usual intensity softened by the footage. Zion nodded, studying every detail of her face, trying to memorize the way she moved, the sound of her voice. They had so few videos of her, each one precious beyond measure. As Lila's song ended, Margot's recorded voice filled the room from her video will, playing on a second screen. Don't let anger lead you, let truth carry you. Your mother wasn't just another victim, she was a light that Richard Hale tried to snuff out. But he failed, because here you both sit, carrying that same light. Zeke reached for a stack of papers, their final preparations for tomorrow's gala. His hands were steady as he began checking their contingency plans one last time. Meanwhile, Zion opened his laptop and pulled up their digital payload. Everything they'd gathered over months of surveillance and infiltration was organized into clear, undeniable evidence. Zion had built it all into an automated release system that would trigger during the gala's live stream. Every major news outlet would receive it simultaneously. No way to stop it once it started. Upload's ready, he said, running a final encryption check. Once we activate it tomorrow, there's no turning back. Zeke nodded, laying out their physical backup plan on the floor between them. He'd prepared multiple fail-safes. Even if they catch us, Zeke said, the truth gets out. All of it. They each took out a sheet of paper and began to write. 2 letters each, one for Margot, one for the world. Their final testimony, just in case. Zion's pen moved slowly, thoughtfully. Dear Margot, you gave up everything to save us, to give us a chance at life, Tomorrow, we use that life to finish what our mother started, to bring truth to light. You taught us how to be strong, how to be smart, but most importantly, how to be human. We won't let anger blind us. We won't become like him. This isn't about revenge. It's about justice, about making sure no one else disappears into his shadows. Zeke's writing was more direct. To whoever finds this, our names are Zion and Zeke. We were born in the Hale estate on October 12th, 18 years ago. Our mother was Lila Williams. She died giving birth to us because Richard Hale, our father, ordered her death covered up. We were supposed to disappear. Instead, we survived. Everything you're about to learn is true. We have proof. And now, finally, the world will know. As midnight approached, they packed away their gear and laid down on their old twin beds. The room was exactly as it had been when they were children, when Margot would read them stories about brave heroes fighting giants. Photos covered one wall, Margot teaching them to read, Leon showing them how to fix engines, the three of them at a park on a rare day off. And in the center, the only photo they had of Lila while she was pregnant, her hand resting protectively over her belly, her eyes full of hope. Zion stared at the ceiling, his mind racing through tomorrow's plans one last time. Tomorrow, we take our name back. Zeke turned to look at his brother in the darkness, and leave his in ashes. They fell silent, listening to the quiet hum of computers and the distant sound of city traffic. In less than 24 hours, everything would change. The truth they'd carried their whole lives would finally be free. Sleep came slowly, but it came. Their last night as ghosts, their last night carrying secrets. Tomorrow they would step into the light, carrying their mother's strength and Margot's wisdom with them. The room fell quiet except for their steady breathing, while outside their window, the city continued its endless pulse, unaware that by this time tomorrow, nothing would be the same. The morning sun glinted off the glass facade of the Hale Industries Tower, casting prismatic reflections across the busy downtown street below. Inside the luxury skyscraper's grand ballroom, the atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. Elite investors in tailored suits mingled with city officials, while reporters adjusted their cameras and checked their microphones. Elaborate flower arrangements decorated every table, and champagne flowed freely. Digital screens around the venue displayed the Hale Industries logo, alongside merger announcements promising a new era of innovation. The room itself was a testament to power and wealth, all glass, chrome, and carefully cultivated prestige. At precisely 11:45 a.m., Richard Hale made his entrance. Camera flashes erupted as he strode through the main doors, wearing a perfectly cut charcoal suit and his trademark confident smile. He waved to the crowd, shaking hands with board members and greeting journalists by name. "Mr. Hale, over here." "Richard, a statement about the merger? Can you comment on the market implications?" He handled each question with practiced charm, playing the role of visionary leader to perfection. But he never noticed the two figures who had already infiltrated his fortress. In the AV control booth, Zion sat calmly at a computer terminal, his contractor's badge displayed prominently. He'd arrived an hour earlier, waved through security thanks to the forged credentials, and planted invitation in EvoCore's system. His fingers moved steadily across the keyboard, preparing the digital payload while pretending to run standard checks. Meanwhile, Zeke navigated the building's maintenance tunnels, his blue coveralls and tool belt, allowing him to move freely through service areas. He'd memorized the blueprint Leon had provided, timing his movements between security sweeps with precision. As the clock approached 1 p.m., Richard Hale took the stage. The crowd fell silent as he approached the podium, the screens behind him displaying polished graphics about market projections and growth potential. "Distinguished guests, members of the press," he began, his voice carrying authority and warmth. "Today marks not just a merger, but a milestone in our continuing legacy of innovation." At 1:15 p.m. exactly, Zion's fingers hovered over the enter key. In the utility room below, Zeke readied the backup trigger. Their hearts beat in sync, though separated by floors of steel and concrete. The screens flickered. Richard Hale's smooth speech faltered as the corporate graphics dissolved, replaced by security footage from 18 years ago. The image was grainy but clear, showing a younger Richard Hale in his estate office speaking to a younger Margot. "They can't exist, make them disappear." His recorded voice echoed through the ballroom's premium sound system. The crowd stirred, confused murmurs rising. Margot's voice came next from her recorded testimony. "He ordered me to dispose of his own children, born to Lila Williams, a woman he'd sworn to protect." Photos appeared. Lila, beautiful and proud, her hand resting on her pregnant belly. Hospital records, birth certificates, death certificates marked stillborn, next to documents proving the twins' survival. The room erupted. Reporters shoved forward, phones raised. Investors stood up, gathering their things. Board members exchanged panicked looks. "This is nonsense," Richard Hale shouted from the podium. "Security, cut the feed." But the screens kept changing. Financial records appeared, showing millions funneled through shell companies, spreadsheets detailing bribes to judges and officials, evidence of families evicted, lives destroyed, all to build his empire. Zeke's finger pressed the live stream button. A small red light began blinking on his device. Global broadcast active. Richard Hale's face had gone from red to pale. "This is slander. These are lies." "No," Zion's voice came clearly through the speakers. "This is truth." The final slide appeared. A split-screen photo. On one side, Lila Williams. On the other, recent photos of the twins, their resemblance to both parents unmistakable. "We are Zion and Zeke," Zion continued, his voice steady. "You tried to erase us. We were born in the dark, raised in silence, but today, we write the ending." Security guards rushed the AV booth and maintenance areas, but the twins had already stepped into the open. They met in the center of the ballroom, facing their father as cameras flashed around them. The guards moved to grab them, but a commanding voice cut through the chaos. "Stop right there." Leon emerged from the press section, press badge gleaming, holding a thick folder. He approached the security team calmly, pulling out official documents. "These young men," he said loudly enough for nearby reporters to hear, "are legally recognized heirs to the Hale estate. Here's their birth certificates, DNA confirmation, and proof of lineage." He handed copies to the nearest journalists. "They're not trespassing, they're family." Richard Hale staggered at the podium, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. The crowd parted as dark-suited figures entered the ballroom, agents from the Justice Department, badges displayed. "Richard Hale," the lead agent announced, "you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and multiple counts of criminal financial misconduct." Hale's eyes were wide with disbelief as the agents approached. He stared at the twins, his sons, seeing for the first time how much they resembled their mother. The truth he'd tried to bury 18 years ago had finally come to light, and there was nowhere left to hide. The morning sun streamed through the office windows of what was once Hale Industries Tower, painting golden rectangles across the polished hardwood floors. The city skyline stretched beyond the glass, a testament to the empire that had crumbled overnight. Headlines scrolled relentlessly across every news channel on the wall-mounted screens, each one more damning than the last, their bold text seeming to pulse with righteous fury. "Richard Hale empire crumbles, billionaire faces multiple federal charges. Twin heirs expose decades of corruption. Hale Industries stock plummets as investors flee." Zion sat at his sleek laptop, his reflection ghostly in the screen as he scanned through the endless coverage. His fingers tapped a quiet rhythm on the desk while his eyes moved methodically through article after article. The evidence they'd released had triggered investigations across 12 states, like dominoes falling in perfect sequence. Federal agents were digging through decades of financial records, uncovering layers of deceit that went deeper than anyone had imagined. City officials who'd taken Hale's bribes were resigning left and right, their carefully constructed facades crumbling under the weight of truth. Zeke stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, his breath slightly fogging the glass as he watched the growing crowd of protesters gather below. The autumn wind whipped their banners and signs, which carried photos of families who'd lost homes to Hale's ruthless developments. Some held pictures of Lila, their mother's gentle smile and bright eyes now transformed into a symbol of resistance against corporate corruption. The sight made his throat tight with emotion. "Another interview request," Zion said, closing his email with a soft click. The afternoon light caught the circles under his eyes, evidence of another sleepless night. CNN this time. They're getting persistent. Zeke turned from the window, his face set in familiar lines of determination. "Same answer as the others?" "Same answer." They'd turned down every media appearance, book deal, and documentary pitch that had flooded their inbox. The vultures circling for profit disgusted them both. The story wasn't theirs to sell or sensationalize. It belonged to everyone their father had tried to erase. Every voice he'd silenced. Every life he'd destroyed in his relentless climb to power. Instead, they worked through the night, their dedication fueled by coffee and purpose, compiling a different kind of story. Zion's fingers flew across the keyboard, the soft clicking a counterpoint to the distant sound of protesters below, as they crafted their only public statement, a blog post titled, "To the Forgotten Ones, You Deserve to Be Seen." The post began simply, without flourish or drama. "We were erased before we were born, but we weren't the only ones." What followed was a meticulously researched list that had taken weeks to compile. Children from affairs Hale had paid to hide, their existence buried under layers of legal documents and hush money, families displaced by his developments, their communities scattered like leaves in a storm, young employees silenced by NDAs and threats, their dreams crushed under the weight of power and privilege. Each entry included not just stories but hope, contact information for legal aid, counseling services, and support groups, resources they'd carefully vetted, ensuring no one would be victimized again. Within hours of posting, responses flooded in, each notification a ping that echoed through the quiet office like a heartbeat. A woman in Chicago wrote with trembling words, "He paid my mother to move across the country when she got pregnant. I never knew why until now." A teenager in Boston shared their pain. "My grandmother lost everything when his company took our neighborhood. She died never seeing justice." A former intern broke years of silence. "I was only 16 when they told me no one would believe me anyway." Zeke read each message, his hands clenching into fists, then slowly relaxing as if releasing years of pent-up anger. His voice was soft but steady when he spoke. "We can help them now," he said, looking at his brother. "Really help them. Make it mean something." They threw themselves into the work with renewed purpose, transforming their skills into tools for healing. Zion converted his hacking expertise into protection, launching Ghostline, a non-profit cybersecurity firm specializing in protecting vulnerable youth from digital exploitation. The irony wasn't lost on them, using the very skills they'd developed to expose their father to now shield others from people like him. They hired survivors of Hale's schemes, training them to become defenders instead of victims, turning pain into purpose. Zeke took a different approach, one that would have made Margot proud. He identified one of Richard's empty luxury properties, a gleaming downtown high-rise meant for elite urban professionals, and began the process of transforming it. Hale House would become a shelter and technology academy, offering safe housing and practical skills to displaced youth. The building that was meant to showcase wealth would instead become a beacon of hope. On a quiet Sunday morning, they visited Margot's grave. The autumn air was crisp and clean, leaves crunching under their feet like whispered secrets as they approached the simple headstone marked Marcia Daniels, her final alias, the last mask she'd worn to protect them. Zeke knelt down, his movements gentle as he brushed away fallen leaves from the smooth stone. From his pocket, he pulled out Margot's old silver locket, the one she'd worn every day of their childhood, the one that had held her own secret close to her heart. Inside was a photo of Lila, their mother smiling bright and brave, frozen in time before tragedy struck, unaware of what lay ahead but facing the world with unwavering hope. They buried the locket in front of the headstone, a private ceremony for the women who had given them life twice over. Zion touched the cold marble gently, his fingers tracing the letters of her assumed name. "We made sure they remember," he whispered, his words carried away by the autumn breeze. Zeke stood beside his brother, their shoulders touching in silent support. "We're not his shadows," he said firmly, his voice steady and sure. "We're our mother's legacy." That evening, they returned to their childhood apartment, the familiar walk up the stairs bringing back a flood of memories. The small rooms held 18 years of life. Margot teaching them to read at the scratched kitchen table, her patience endless. Leon sprawled on the floor with them, showing them how to fix radios with careful hands and quiet wisdom, countless late nights planning their mission under dim lights, the walls witnessing their transformation from victims to vigilantes. The knock came just after sunset, when the sky had turned the color of old bruises. They weren't expecting anyone. Zeke moved instinctively to the security camera they'd installed, while Zion checked the hallway sensors with practiced efficiency. Nothing triggered their alerts, no electronic signatures, no suspicious movement patterns. Through the camera, they saw a teenage girl, maybe 15 or 16, standing alone in the hallway. She clutched a worn envelope in trembling hands, the paper crumpled from nervous fingers. Her dark eyes darted nervously down the hallway, checking both directions like someone used to watching their back. Zion opened the door carefully, security habits too ingrained to ignore. The girl startled at the sound, then straightened her shoulders with visible effort. "My mom," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, rough with emotion. "She said she worked for Richard Hale." She held out the envelope like an offering or a shield. "I found this in her things after she died. I think I'm one of you." The brothers exchanged a look, years of shared experience and understanding passing between them in that silent moment. They saw Margot finding them in the storm, Leon opening his door without question, every person who'd helped two forgotten children find their way home. They saw their mother's smile in the old photograph, bright with hope for a future she'd never see. Zeke smiled, warm and genuine, the expression transforming his face. Zion stepped back from the doorway, making space in their carefully guarded sanctuary. "Come in," he said softly, his voice carrying all the welcome they'd once received themselves. "You're home. I believe stories like this find us for a reason. If this one touched you, please subscribe. I share a new one every day, and tomorrow's might be the one your heart's been waiting for."